So if we haven't been talking about enough, there's still more news going on. So the defense now rests its case today in the Paul Manafort trial. The attorneys, he has 3 of them, didn't call any witnesses, and Manafort didn't testify. That was kind of expected.
Yeah,
He's
very
not
rare.
required to do it, and most of the times you don't want him to.
You don't want to do it. Yeah.
So this is all due to the Fifth Amendment. Of course, this sets the stage for closing arguments as soon as tomorrow.
And that's exactly where we want to welcome in former federal prosecutor Larry Klayman. Larry, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. My pleasure. How are you?
I'm good, Larry. Larry, I just have a feeling that you have a lot to say about this. Was this what you were expecting, the way you thought this would go down today?
I think what the defense lawyers did for Manafort was very smart because they really bloodied up the primary witness, Rick Gates. It kind of is like sending a message to the jury. Look, we don't have to say anything here. We won. I'm not saying they are going to win. Okay, I'm just saying that under the circumstances where there was this much evidence that was presented by Mueller's team, it's good basically to say, okay, I have no worries. In fact, I had a similar situation in Las Vegas, Nevada months ago with regard to 2 clients I now represent in the Bundy trials. They were accused of threatening federal agents. They didn't even present any testimony, no witnesses. They gave no closing arguments. The jury thought the whole thing stunk and acquitted them summarily. So I think this was really smart by Manafort's lawyers. They've done basically what they could do with the little they had to work with.
So Larry, let me ask you a question. What should we be looking at now? Is this going to rest in the hands of the jury or Manafort's attorneys? There were some reports that were going to file a motion to dismiss with the judge. Do they have that option now that it's with the jury, or do we just have to wait and see what the jury decides?
Well, they do. They have the option to argue for a directed verdict, in effect, to say, okay, the evidence does not amount to a crime. And of course, Judge T.S. Ellis did allude to that earlier. He said, look, if you can't show intent here, that Manafort knew what he was doing, that he was hiding money intentionally, that he was not paying taxes intentionally. And of course, that was the defense's case, that Gates was doing this, not him. And that Gates had stolen from Manafort to support 4 affairs that he was having on the side. Well, it kind of makes sense. And they're going to be moving for a directed verdict. You do that as a matter of course anyway to preserve your post-trial motions. You have to do that.
Larry, based on your experience, I have to ask you, what's your prediction here? What do you anticipate will happen, not only with this case, but the other trial that he is going to be facing? I mean, again, there's 25 counts here. Yeah. A lot of people think that Judge Ellis has actually helped the defense. What do you think is going to happen? Judge
Ellis has helped the defense. I think the odds are probably better than not that he gets convicted, but Manafort knows he's got 2 options here. Number one, he can take this up to a higher court and say that Mueller had no authority to prosecute him and get it thrown out. And at the end of the day, I'm virtually certain the president will pardon him, not because he's guilty, but because he has been treated so unfairly and his life has been destroyed as well as his family. So he's got some aces up his sleeve here.
All right, Larry, let's switch gears and talk about this terrible, terrible case in New Mexico. I want you to put your prosecutor hat back on. So the judge in New Mexico, Taos County judge, very liberal area, that county voted 69.9% for Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. She granted a signature bond to 5 suspects who allegedly kept these kids in this filthy and heavily fortified compound. The judge's name is Sarah Bacchus. Like I said, she released them on a signature bond, and they are required to wear ankle monitors and are under house arrest. But Larry, this is unusual. I mean, signature bonds are for misdemeanor cases, minor shoplifting. In fact, I found a case out of North Carolina where a guy was, a judge imposed a $100,000 bond to a guy who shoplifted ham and aspirin because he was a career criminal. These 5 are accused of teaching children to carry out school shootings to kill their classmates. A 3-year-old child, the son of the lead defendant, Siraj bin Wahaj, who was found dead. We now believe that the body there was the body of his 3-year-old son, killed in a religious ceremony. They wrapped that child in plastic like trash and buried him under sewage. The judge says that the state, Larry, didn't present enough evidence to prove that these people were a threat. And furthermore, their lawyer argued, well, they're only being prosecuted because they're black and Muslim. I mean, I've never seen anything this egregious from a judge who Fox News, by the way, is reporting has a history of disproportionately low or lenient bail for defendants. Need to hear what you think on this one, Larry, as a former prosecutor.
This is the problem that we have with judges today. You see it in state court, you see it in federal court. They wear their politics on their sleeve. She's obviously a leftist. She's a Democrat. She was influenced by the fact that you have African Americans and Muslims, and you're not supposed to hold them to equal justice any more than you hold anybody else in this country anymore. Everybody should be treated equal, I might add. But this is symptomatic of the problems on the judiciary, and I hope that people in her district will vote her out of office next time. But somebody should also file a judicial ethics complaint against her. The problem with that is, and I go through this all the time, is that judges sit in judgment of their fellow judges, so they circle the wagons and don't do anything.
Right.
That's why I started Judicial Watch many years ago. It's why I now run Freedom Watch at freedomwatchusa.org. We need independent, good judges who mete out the law, not their own political predilections.
So, Larry, but the signature bond is just that, right? They sign their name and they basically say, we promise to show back up.
Well, yes, and it's an outrage. And I'll give you, by contrast, again, the Bundy trial, which we won. Ultimately, we had the indictment dismissed. My client, Klayman Bundy, and his sons and 17 others were thrown in prison without bail. They hadn't threatened anybody. They hadn't hurt anybody. In fact, Klayman was thrown in prison in solitary confinement initially. Wow. So contrast that with the way these criminals are being treated, and it's obviously an outrage.
Yeah, Manafort is sitting in solitary confinement for a nonviolent crime, and right. These defendants are released.
I just don't understand. I mean, these children were abused. They were malnourished. It was filthy, disgusting.
Unreal.
When I was listening to what the sheriff was saying, describing it, I mean, they could barely speak.
Right, and we watched the video of that compound. And it was a disgusting place.
A 3-year-old little boy died, and like you said, found buried under sewage. They believe it to be him. They haven't confirmed that yet, but they do believe.
And the grandfather feels it's him as well, because he knew he was on the compound. Now we're.
I have to ask you, Larry, because this is an issue that came up. So some people have said, if it was Christians.
Larry. I'm glad you went.
I gotta ask, if they were Christians,
NRA members, white male
claiming
Christians,
to be Christians, like
NRA members,
whatever, a cult, white.
Right.
Do you think the judge would have handed the same kind of
bail, lenient, non-bail, really?
Yeah.
Probably not. I'll tell you something. There are certain groups in this country, and it shouldn't be that way. And I'm a civil rights lawyer, among other things, but there are protected species, human beings in this country that think they're above the law and they can just walk off scot-free. They can say whatever they want. Look at Amoroso in the White House today. She thinks because she's a minority, she can get away with this. But you know what? We all need to be treated equally and need to be held accountable. And judges are our most important public servants in theory, but in fact, in reality, they're among our worst. They are so corrupted. They're so politicized. They're so into themselves that they need to be held accountable. And that's what we're trying to do. We have a judicial selection strike force at Freedom Watch.
And I'm sure you heard about her being in trouble now for, of course, as the Trump campaign contends, violating her non-disclosure agreement with that campaign. Did you read about this, Larry Omarosa's situation here? And do you think that the campaign has a legitimate cause against her?
They do, and they should exercise that legally in court. There was a non-disclosure agreement. It's also defamation. The president's a public figure, and so is General Kelly, but if there's malice, you can prove defamation.
And what about the fact that the time that she was in the White House, that should, everyone's saying that's protected under her Fifth Amendment rights, and that was First Amendment rights, and that's right between where she was first in the campaign and where she is now outside the White House. Will that have any bearing on that case?
No. Rough analogy. There's no more rights to being in the White House than there is for football players who you pay money to go see every Sunday in the NFL. Not standing up for the American flag. There's no rights there. These owners could fire them, and of course, these are the football players. The president certainly was right in firing Amoroso. She was a cancer in the White House. Apparently, she worked in the Clinton-Gore White House years earlier. So she had this undercurrent of liberalism or leftism, and apparently she just took the job from Trump. Then when she didn't get what she wanted, she retaliated against him. And it's really
Larry, not to interrupt, but to clarify what I think Gina meant, are Omarosa's statements while she was in the White House, is she impervious to litigation on those because they're First Amendment protected? It's a public building. She was a public official. About 30 seconds, Larry.
Absolutely not. Senators and congressmen on the floor of the Congress are protected for what they say there, but that's the exception. They are not protected for what's said inside the White House.
Larry Klayman, as always, thanks for the expertise and thanks for being with us. Great to see you, Larry.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, interesting stuff.
Yeah.
I love getting his legal expertise on that.
I could have
Larry's
spent a
engaged
whole
in that,
show just asking Larry questions on just the Omarosa situation.
That was an interesting
So many
argument
questions.
because not everyone is saying that. Some people are still arguing that it is protected.
People
underneath.
get
A lot of
very
experts are saying it
confused
is,
about-
yeah.
People still, I hear experts all the time misstate First Amendment protections.
All right, coming up after the break, we're going to be talking about those domestic violence allegations against Keith Ellison. He's running for Attorney General of Minnesota. We'll tell you all about it.